This is a lecture from Open Tuition. To benefit from the lecture, you should download the free lecture notes from opentuition.com.
Chapter 1 deals with the nature of strategy and how strategies might be devised or formulated. Now, when we talk about the word or the term strategy, what we are usually talking about is some sort of long-term or long-range plan, usually for the whole organization. And if you have in mind here a kind of time frame of maybe at least 5 years, we want to be knowing what is the company or the organization, what's it going to be doing in 5 years, what sort of markets is it going to be in, what sort of technology may have evolved then, what is our competition going to be like, how are we going to be still existing and thriving in 5 years' time. Now, although in theory the term strategy or strategic plan can be applied to various levels in the organization, really it's at this top level here, and the corporate level is really the board. It's they who have a particular duty under corporate governance to be thinking about the longer term future and the strategic safety and the strategic decisions that have to be made to allow the organization to have a sustainable future. When you get a little bit further down the organization, away from the main board, but you're then getting maybe to the head of a department or even the head of a subsidiary, something of that sort, we tend then to be talking about the business level or the strategic business unit level. An SBU, Strategic Business Unit, is really just a discrete part of the business which needs a kind of different form of management, maybe making different products and so on. These people tend to be looking maybe at a horizon maybe of about a year. They're particularly concerned with, am I going to hit this year's budget? And when you get down to the operational level here, well, really it's a kind of daily struggle. At the operational level, they will be worried about, are we going to have enough staff coming on duty to handle the sales or passengers or whatever it's going to be. So generally speaking, when you're talking about a strategic plan, 9 times out of 10, we're talking about this high level strategic plan. That's not to say that further on down you mightn't have people looking further than the 1 year ahead and so on. Even when you get down to the kind of operational level here, it may be at that level people are thinking about how should we maybe reorganize our department a little bit. Should we buy a new computer, a new piece of software and so on. And that could be maybe a kind of decision made quite far down the organization, but it will tend to be dealing with current problems rather than planning for the longer term future. And when it comes to thinking about how we're going to formulate the strategic plan for kind of where we're going to be in 5 years, there are a number of different approaches. And this is the first and indeed grandest approach, and it's called the rational model to strategic planning. And basically, it comprises 3 elements. First of all, you assess the position of the company, what its competitors are doing, what the technology might be doing, what might be happening in the world outside that it's going to have to operate in and maybe sell to. So this position here is basically collect data. And we'll be looking at some of these individual kind of boxes in here about the various ways we might be thinking of collecting data. But all I'll say now is that some of the data is going to come from outside, like competition, like maybe new laws that are going to be passed, that maybe different things happening in the political world and so on. We also look internally. What resources and competences do we have? How can we maybe best match what we can do and what we have with maybe what customers need and what action competitors are taking. Then in the next stage here, there's effectively a choice, which you can kind of think of as a kind of analysis phase. And this analysis phase really takes all of this data which we've collected and says, given this is what the situation is, how can I best proceed? And very often it's not clear-cut how you should proceed. Should we open in a North American office, or should we maybe open in the Asian office? Maybe we don't have the resources to do both. We might be thinking, should we outsource our delivery, our logistics and so on, or should we keep it in-house, and maybe what we have to do is outsource our IT? Should we go into this product development, or should we withdraw from that product development? So there's often a lot of choices here, and of course if you're thinking 5 years, 10 years ahead, you're never going to be certain you make the right choice, but a choice does have to be made. And we make the best or safest choice. It should be the choice which is going to please your stakeholders most. Your stakeholders is a mixture of your shareholders, your employees, your customers, and so on. How are we going to keep most of them happy most of the time with the strategic choices that we have been made? And then comes the hard work here, the action here. We can do the position analysis, we can make the choice, almost in a rather, almost like sitting in a darkened room and just thinking fine thoughts. Maybe we can get through that process in a week or something. But the action could then be 3 years, 5 years, 6 years, hard work. If your choice is to open in North America, then there is a fantastic amount of work and organization, implementation basically, that has to be followed through. And unfortunately many strategies fail, not because they were planned badly, but really because they were implemented badly. People kind of lost the plot, or they weren't very good at project management, and so on. And all the time what we have to be doing is keeping the strategic plan and where we are under control. Are we, for example, staying up with the dates that we set for implementing the plan? But more seriously than that, we have to think, is the plan still relevant? Because things happen. We might have made an excellent strategic choice now, but then a year later, some awful catastrophe happens in the world economy, and it could be that the plan that we made is now simply no longer relevant or viable, and we have to abandon it. So no strategic plan should ever be written in stone. We should always be remaining flexible. We have a kind of target we think we're going to get to, but who knows, we may have to modify it a little bit, and in extreme cases we may have to completely abandon that plan because of the force of circumstances. Now that really the next slide we have here is simply saying that the strategy is never the simple 1, 2, 3, collect the data, make the choice, do the plan, really. It's very often more likely to be a kind of iterative process. So let's say what you were doing is you were trying to decide with some friends where to go on holiday. So what you would do is you would look up the internet, you would maybe get some brochures from holiday companies, you would check hotels, check flights and so on. And then you get together one evening, and maybe the four of you decide, well, I'm going to go to, let's say Spain for 2 weeks in the end of August. So that's your strategic choice made. You've collected the data, you've made the choice, and then you go back and you try booking the holidays, and you find the hotel that you planned on booking was maybe full. Or you find the flights have gone up in price. Or maybe what happens, one of your friends goes back to work and finds that it's impossible to get those 2 weeks off that were thought to be free and so on. Because when you go to put a plan into action, you always find out more things. Often you find out about more problems that may exist in actually implementing that plan. And really what we have to kind of do then is to kind of go back to the drawing board there, and we call up our friends again and we say, well, hey, that's not quite possible. Are you happy to move to a different hotel? Are you happy to leave on a Friday rather than a Saturday, and so on? So this planning never really stops. You have the main idea that you don't want to abandon too easily, but you have to remain flexible. Essentially what we have here, if we put this diagram up, is really a recognition that the intended strategy, that's like the big plan at the start, is rarely ever going to be realized. Because what you will do is you will abandon some of it. Maybe it turns out to be a bad idea, maybe you can't afford to do it, maybe it turns out to be far more difficult than you thought it would be, so you kind of throw that one out. And then as time goes by, remember we're thinking 3, 5, 10 years, new strategies will emerge that had never really been envisaged back here. And what we end up with is a kind of mixture here of some ideas that we originally had planned, less bits of it we abandoned, plus good ideas that emerge. So for example, as we begin embarking on the residue of our strategy, we suddenly discover that maybe a competitor is in financial difficulty, and suddenly, rather unexpectedly, a new potential strategy has emerged, and maybe we can buy them cheaply. And if we buy this competitor cheaply, it knocks a bit of the competition out and so on. Maybe that's what we should do, rather than sticking very blinkered to the original strategy. Some people would say that this rational strategic model is really an arrogance. They say that nobody can possibly predict what the position is going to be in 5, let alone 10 years ahead, and therefore you are in a bit of a fooling yourself really if you think you can do these strategies. And furthermore, they will often say that it kind of locks you into a strategy that may be inappropriate. And what we're really talking about in this here is something called bounded rationality. You can't make a perfect plan if you don't have perfect knowledge. And none of us, in a way, has perfect knowledge about the situation now. For example, we don't know what our competitors might be planning now, but we certainly don't have perfect knowledge about what the world economic situation might be in a couple of years' time. And these people would say that these grand leap forwards, planning 5 years at a time, is dangerous and arrogant. And they say what you should do is to really look at small extensions of past policies, past strategies. So it's a bit like this. So this is the kind of world economy, yeah? Now, I suppose if you remember back to around 2007, in 2007 we had a remarkable number of years of growth and so on here. The economy had been kind of on the rise, and nearly everyone looked at the economy, everything improving, and in particular the price of houses and apartments and land and so on was going up. And remember, if you're back here, you don't see the future. This is the kind of future here, yeah? And this is kind of 2008, when the financial crisis kind of struck, the banking crisis struck. But you're down here, all you see is things have been good in the past, and you kind of extrapolate up there. And maybe if you were in the building offices, houses, apartments and so on here, you'd be planning for this to be increasing here, be buying up lots of land, starting up lots of apartment blocks and so on, and suddenly the crash came. But once you kind of had started these, you're a bit locked into them because you can't sell off an office block and so on. But you then take fright really, you stop developing anything more, you don't do anything at all, and then you kind of going down like this, and then suddenly maybe the economy takes up again. So you kind of lurch around the place because you're trying to plan at 5 years at a time, and you get yourself locked into those 5-year plans, irrespective of what might be happening in the environment. So these incrementalist people say, well, don't try and predict 5 years, be a bit more modest, take it 1 year at a time maybe, or a couple of years at a time, and then you will maybe see that the market is tailing off a little bit, and you'll be able to track the environment more closely than in a way making these big gambles that your predictions are going to be correct. So if we can't tell the future, what they would say is the point in setting a plan for 5 years. Of course, sometimes making little adjustments, little extensions on past strategies won't cut it. If you were in the music industry, there was little point really in maybe trying to gently cut down the production of CDs, because really very quickly indeed people moved to MP3s and downloads and that sort of a market, and really radical changes were needed to keep music companies and then maybe film and television companies and maybe book publishing companies now again to allow them to survive in the face of new technology. And then at the kind of bottom of the I suppose the formal or approach to strategy, we have people called freewheeling opportunists. And really these people don't like planning. Psychologically they don't like it. And again, we have friends like this. Sometimes if you're going out with friends, some people like to know exactly where we're going and so on. They, if you like, are the rational planners. Other people have no idea where they're going. They'll go to different places. If they like somewhere, they'll stay there. If they don't like somewhere, they'll kind of pass on to another restaurant or whatever grabs their fancy at the time, really. These people often have a kind of entrepreneurial spirit about them. They love kind of grabbing new opportunities as they arise and try to starting new businesses and so on there. And they would say the best thing to do is not to have plans, because once you have a plan that kind of it almost restricts you into following that plan, or at least restricts you into trying to preserve bits of it. And there may be all of this good stuff happening around you which you ignore. So these people say don't plan. We never know quite how good they are. There obviously are in the world some people who have been very good serial entrepreneurs. Like Richard Branson, he started his life, if you like, in the music business, having, as it were, then record shops. And then he moved into the airline business, and now he's in financial services and all sorts of things. He seems to be very good at this serial entrepreneurship. But you never quite know if how much is judgment and maybe how much is luck. A lot of people who try this serial entrepreneurship go bankrupt. You never hear about them. You only hear about the people who if you like, bet on the right thing 5 times in a row and kind of come up with a jackpot. The great thing about these people here is they can make very fast decisions. One of the potential disadvantages of the rational planning approach is that people can really get bogged down. They almost get frightened at grabbing opportunities unless they've gone through this strict process of collecting the data, analysing the data, coming to some sort of consensual decision, by which time the opportunity might have gone. The downside of this freewheeling opportunism is sometimes people kind of jump into opportunities with their eyes closed and both feet together, and they bitterly regret that they embarked on that sort of an opportunity. And finally, we have Finally, we also have the political approach to strategy, which is a kind of weird approach. It's not really based on planning. It's based on almost power struggles within an organization, and the plan that the organization ends up with is maybe the plan which is put forward by the strongest person, or the person who shouts louder, or the person who is more manipulative, rather than it being based on anything which is maybe sensible for the long-term future of the company. Now, in our rational planning model, which we had back here, one of the first things we had was a mission, and then we will get on to looking at maybe stakeholder appraisal as well. Let's think about the mission statement, and what is the mission. The mission of an organization tries to set out the purpose of the organization, its reason for being. Like we are a hospital, or we are a car company, or we are an airline. Now, why is it necessary? And it's become very common, almost fashionable, to have your mission on your website. Why is it important? Surely you would know what your purpose is. Well, you think about, what is, saying our purpose is to be a hospital. That doesn't quite get it. What do you mean by it? When you say you're a hospital, what is your purpose? Is it to make people better? If you can't make them better, is it to alleviate their pain? And are you encompassing any sort of research activities in being a hospital? Are you doing any prevention? Are you bringing people in for, some sort of a review every 3 years to try and prevent disease happening or to catch it early on and so on there? So it's often not quite so easy to know what your purpose is, and maybe actually writing it down in some way could be quite useful to guide employees, to guide investors, and to guide maybe interacting members of the public outside, so we know what this organization is for. It will often say something about the position. So you could say both Nissan and Mercedes, the purpose is, we are a car company, but in a way they are quite different. Mercedes is aiming at the higher level executive luxury type cars. Nissan is more everyday family cars, both perfectly good and so on there. But you might expect Mercedes to have some sort of mission statement to the effect that we want to be the best manufacturer of executive cars in the world. You might have Nissan rather saying, well, we want to be the best manufacturing of quality family cars in the world, or something of that sort. And again, it kind of alerts people about what the purpose of this organization is. And the other thing it should be doing is to make the directors think hard if they're going to depart from that mission. So if you set yourself up as a maker of luxury cars, how safe is it if you bring out a cheap model? And Mercedes actually thought about this until maybe 30 years ago. They only made very large cars, and then they thought about bringing out their A series, I think it is, the kind of smaller model, and there were serious thoughts within that organization. Here we are, known as a maker of these large luxury cars. Will we actually hurt our brand if we depart from that mission and bring out smaller, runabouts for the town? Obviously, they thought it was fine to do that, and it gets even more radical if you're thinking of diversifying in a big way. And it's often really a bit of a graveyard of companies if they do try to diversify. They're in supermarkets, and suddenly they try to become a bank, or maybe they try to build houses or something of that sort. And quite often, because you're good at one thing doesn't mean you can just turn your hand and be good at another. And if it makes management think, look, this is what we are, this is what we're known for, this is where we'll have our skills, how sensible is it to change to something else or bring something else on board? And then we have the most mission statements of a whole big section. A mission statement, by the way, is about no more than a page of A4, ideally, about half a page of printing. Then we have usually a whole big section on kind of warm, touchy-feely stuff on the organization's values, its cultures, and its ethics. And here's where nearly all mission statements end up being nearly the same: warm, fuzzy, furry, nice kind of values here. That we are going to be kind to the environment, we're going to minimize our carbon footprint, we are going to be an equal opportunity employer, we're going to pay our taxes, maybe. we are going to comply with the laws of the land and so on. We will treat our customers fairly there. And no one's going to ever admit in their mission statement that our mission is to sell goods of the minimum possible quality, the maximum possible price. They will all have much more positive things to say down here. So to some extent they all become a little bit similar, but the advantage maybe of having these values, cultures and ethics in there is if the company, and particularly the board, keeps pushing those here, then apart from PR, apart from maybe customers and so on thinking this is a good company, it should rub off on the employees. If the board really pushes the values of the company, the ethics of the company, the thought is if your employees absorb that, then you can trust them more. You don't need to have as much hands-on supervision. They will only want to do the right things. They will comply with the values, culture and ethics. And then we had stakeholders. Stakeholders are anyone or anybody who is affected by the organisation. A whole range of them here: shareholders, employees, managers, suppliers, customers, local people, government, lenders. These are all touched or affected by the organisation. And the big issue really about stakeholders is what they want from the organisation is usually in conflict. That if you think of your shareholders, they always want their profits up. But the employees, they want their wages up. And of course, the more wages you give to employees, the less profits and dividends is going to be to the shareholders. So there's a conflict to be resolved there. And we all know if it goes wrong, then the employees might go on strike. They lose money, the shareholders lose money, and all, it gets very untidy. You can also get further on down all sorts of conflicts as well here. Maybe if you're the manager of an airport, the manager of the airport maybe wants ideally 24 hours kind of operation to maximize the use of the infrastructure. Maybe the local people just want planes taking off 10 hours a day. And again, there's a bit of a conflict going on. Or your customers here, they want high quality, they want their prices down, but at the same time these people of course want their profits up. And conflict between stakeholders is inevitable, and it's up to management to try and manage it. And the only tool around is something called Mendeleff's matrix, where we plot out the power of the stakeholder and the interest of the stakeholder. Now, interest really means, if it's high interest, it really means these stakeholders are likely to be very active. Whereas if it's low interest, they're likely to be much more passive. Okay. And this is really the power play, I suppose. And if you start off with the key players here, these stakeholders have power, and my goodness me, they will act on it. For example, they will go and strike at the drop of a hat. And these key players tend to get most of what they want when it comes to any form of negotiation. And they muscle themselves in, maybe unfairly, but that's what happens. And then we have people who have power, but for some reason they don't exercise that power. They're relatively passive. Maybe it's professional reasons, maybe it's moral reasons. They know, for example, if they were to go on strike, then maybe patients, for example, in the hospital would suffer. These people have to be given enough to keep them satisfied. In other words, you just keep them on side. You should be aware that if you provoke them enough, if instead of not only do you not give them a pay rise, you give them a pay cut, then of course you will maybe incense them, and they will actually change up here, become active in fighting for their share of the cake, really. We then have the keep informed people here. The keep informed people are a little bit delusion in there. They are very active, they're very interested in what's happening, but they have no power. These people make a lot of fuss and noise, but they can't do very much about it. So in the UK, whenever, let's say, maybe a new railway is being planned, obviously the local people who are going to be near the new tracks get upset. But they've got relatively little power once the thing goes through its planning process and so on there. Once you've exhausted that, you can't do very much more. You can stand there with placards and protest and so on, but not a lot you can do. What you're supposed to do there is to keep them informed. Keep them informed, A, for politeness, and secondly, what they fear may be worse than what will actually happen. And then finally, we have the minimal effort here. And this is just a polite way of saying you can ignore these people. They have no power, they're not interested. These people are going to be right at the end of the queue when it comes to getting something from the organization. Examples of these people might be employees with very low skill levels. So there are lots of them out there. These people leave, there's no problem in replacing them. And also maybe employees who are not looking for a career in one organization. They would quite happy to move around and so on there. And if you do something which they don't like, they'll simply move on to another organization. They won't get worked up about it. They move on, you recruit other people and so on. So you can nearly ignore the wishes of this section of stakeholders. Strategy in different contexts here. How's it likely to arise? Well, the rational strategy that we talked about is most likely to be pursued in large companies. Large companies tend to have very formal planning mechanisms. They will have the resources very often to collect information and to analyze it properly and so on. And because of the structure, because you have the board and managers and so on, people would expect some sort of rational approach to strategy. When you get to small and medium-sized enterprises, quite often in small or medium-sized enterprises, these are run by the owner. These are quite often kind of family companies. That's more likely where you may be going to get the opportunist, the person who isn't that interested in strategy, who has started the company, it's gone well, and now believes the best way to progress is to do what I say. Kind of be reasonable, do what I say sort of approach. And also, if they do rational planning, it's likely not to be quite as sophisticated, simply because a lot of rational planning can be very expensive, very time-consuming, to a lot of resources, and these small companies don't have it. Public sector, rational planning there, or the planning strategy there. If you think of public sector as, let's say, the health service or the educational service in many countries, they will often be looking certainly 10 years ahead. Government should be planning new schools, new hospitals and so on. It often takes that sort of a time scale to plan and build them. They will be gathering information about the population, for example, the number of kids who are going to be starting a school within the next 5 years. What they are very constrained with, first of all, there of course is political outlooks. Different political parties have got different attitudes to what the right form of government should be. But they also tend to be quite constrained by the economy. How much public money is there going to be to follow through the strategy? At least a company, if it needs money, if it makes a good case for building a new factory, it can usually raise the money. It's a little bit different in a government sort of organization. Of course they can put up taxes, but of putting up taxes there are ramifications elsewhere in the economy. Not for profit, maybe something like a charity. Charity is likely to be run by not so much boards of directors, but they're going to be run by really trustees of the charity and so on. And again, they may be looking fairly long term. Small charities will not do very much rational planning, but large charities will. Large international charities will be trying to plan as, maybe what areas of the world do we have to look at for maybe relief of disease and so on. They'll be looking into the future, maybe what sort of vaccines are being produced. They are liable to have a reasonably long-term approach, and we would hope as donors to the charity that they are not too taken by opportunism. If you're giving money to a charity and it has to be spent carefully, you'd expect some decent level of rational planning to be taking place. Now, as part of the planning of strategy, what we have to consider is strategic capability. In other words, it's all very well planning, but what can we do? What are we capable of doing? Or what could we become capable of doing? And here we have to learn a couple of phrases, really, a couple of terms. What you can do depends on the resources you have and your competences. So, for example, if I want to set myself up as a car manufacturer, that's my capability, I need to have certain resources like a big factory, but I also need competences in design and engineering and purchasing and marketing and so on. So my capability is the sum of my resources and competences. If any of these is missing, then you either can't pursue that strategy you were thinking about, or you have to find the resource or develop the competence in some way before you can go forward. You start with what's called threshold capabilities, and these are the minimum capabilities needed just to survive. So these will allow you just to about break even. You're kind of clinging on with your fingertips there to survival, but it's not a great life. It's not very secure. The organization is always in danger of not surviving because it's got no spare, really. It's just about breaking even. Very little to reinvest in new products, for example. What all organizations should be looking for is a strategic capability. And when you got this word strategy in here, remember this is 5 years, yeah? Capability for the next 5, next 10 years, that's going to give us competitive advantage. That is going to allow us to perform better than our competitors in the long term. Because if you can't perform better than your competitors, whether you're profit-seeking or not for profit-seeking, if you can't perform better than your competitors long term, you are not going to survive long term. So what we need is the threshold capabilities, the bare minimum capabilities, and then we need additional capabilities which give us the edge over our competitors and makes our position far more secure. Now, the additional capabilities, or the capabilities for competitive advantage, can come from 2 areas. First of all, you could be blessed by having unique resources. So sometimes pharmaceutical companies have this. A pharmaceutical company makes a marvelous discovery. They have a drug which cures a disease, and they're the only people with a drug which does that. And that patent will last maybe for 15 years. And they will be able to make fantastic profits out of selling this excellent, unique drug for the next 15 years. Another example might be if you own maybe a mine. So maybe you own a mine, and the mine is producing rare earth metals which are needed in modern technology and so on. If there aren't many other mines like that around the world, again, your unique resource, a mine in this case, is going to give you the pathway to making very good profits. However, for most companies, they will not have unique resources. Ordinary manufacturing companies, the ordinary machinery you see around most factories, is not unique. You can go and buy a cutting machine, a polishing machine, a lathe, and so on. You could duplicate the machinery in factories relatively easy, but whether or not you can use that machinery to make a uniquely good product then depends on your core competences. Ways in which an organization uses its resource better than its competitors, and which others find difficult to imitate or to obtain these resources. And we can maybe talk here, and we'll probably talk about this a number of times during this course, about Apple. Now you could argue that Apple doesn't really have unique resources. Apple doesn't make its own phones, doesn't make its own computers and iPads and so on there. These are all subcontracted, usually to companies in China like Foxconn. So there's nothing unique about the manufacturing, but what Apple has is a fantastic competence at, say, design, of envisaging new products like, the iPhone, like iTunes, like the iPad, the tablets and so on there. And everyone else is kind of, in a way, following in their wake. There's an element of Me Too in many of the other producers. Now, what Apple has is a core competence in its design, really, and other competitors are finding this very hard to imitate or obtain. You could say that maybe for the last 15 years, Apple has been in the front when it comes to designing new products, and others are finding a bit of a problem. What is it about Apple that allows it to so far have done that pretty well? Is it the way they recruit people? Is it the way they train them? Is it the way they manage them? Was it just Steve Jobs who was providing this unique competence? The resources which we can list out, but sometimes people talk about the M words here. Money, you need financial resources. So if you want to build a new factory, if that is your strategy, either you need the money, you need the finance, or if you don't have the finance, you must raise the finance. But you can't proceed without the resources and competences you need. Manpower really means your human resources, or men and women, if you like. You need management, and management is often a resource which is sadly lacking in small firms, particularly family firms. The entrepreneur who started the firm doesn't want to let go, doesn't want to give any responsibility to outsiders. Even worse, the person who started the firm may want to give that to the children, and the children really aren't interested in it, and so on, but they do it to please the father or the mother, and you end up with a company that's then managed by people who've really got no particular talent whatsoever. Manufacturing resource or machinery, we need that. We need enough markets to sell into, and sometimes, of course, we will be thinking of expanding abroad just to find new markets. We need marketing expertise, and maybe we need to fine-tune that to different international markets. Can we get enough material? And from time to time, a shortage of material is going to impose restrictions on your resources. From time to time, historically, there were shortages of microprocessing chips that meant the production of certain computers and so on was a bit restricted. MIS means you need good IT resources, and MIS is Management Information Systems, and increasingly good IT resources, a clever website over which you can take orders and so on is vital. Methods is really know-how, and we're getting really to almost go into competences. To some extent, the distinction between resource and the competence. Resources, if you think, are really your tangible assets. Competences, know-how, and skills and management structure and so on are kind of intangible assets. But if you don't have the know-how, if you don't have the technical competence to pursue a particular strategy, again, you're wasting your time. And maybe what you have to do is try to recruit people with that competence, or maybe you take over a company that can bring that competence into you. And then there is the make, which is really the brand. The brand is a valuable resource. A well-respected brand name makes it easy for you to launch new products. It means that if people go into the supermarket, they kind of automatically go back to your brand. They barely consider other brands which are around the place. And these are closely guarded normally by employees, by companies. Ideally, resources should be of value to the company in helping it to make profits. They should be rare, because if they're not rare, then other people can easily lay their hands on them. Ideally, they would be unique, but that's very difficult. Inimitable really means they're going to be quite hard to copy in some way, and non-substitutable. So if you can't get that resource, if you can't get that particular metal, then ideally you won't be able to use another sort of a metal, or your competitors won't be able to use another sort of metal to make those products. Now there was a big kind of debate, and still is to some extent, over should your strategy be driven by your resources, or should it be what's called position-based? Now, position-based is what we're going to start with here. What position-based said, really, was if the environment changes, if the market changes, if the technology changes, you have to be humble enough to change in response, to change yourself in response. No company can stand against the tide of new technology, so to speak, and react to that. In other words, you change your position. And this was really what is put forward by somebody called Porter. And people really began to see this in the 1980s. In the 1980s, the beginning of the 1980s, until about halfway through, IBM was a fantastically powerful maker of computers, but they were the big mainframe computers. And then around 81, 82, personal computers, desktop computers were invented. And that leap forward in technology nearly forced IBM into liquidation, because it kept making its big computers. The chairman of IBM would come out and say things like, I can't imagine why anyone would want a computer at home. They just misjudged the effect of technology on them. And now people are much more alert to saying, what's happening? What do our customers want? What are our competitors doing? Should we change the internet? So should we change our position? Now these people, and really this name should be down here, Prahalad and Hamel, they then later on, in the really 1990s, put forward an approach to strategy that was called resource-based, where they said, no, just hang on a moment. You've built up over the year very carefully a fantastic set of resources, know-how, a team of people, machinery, distribution lines, and so on. You have a fantastic know-how within the business, competences within the business, and so on. This combination of resources and competences is what historically has allowed you to make good profits. And they're really saying, don't abandon that too easily. Because if you say, I'm not going to use those resources and competences anymore, I'm going to change with the market, change to something else, then you're really starting from zero again and having to gradually acquire these resources and competences and claw your way to the top. So these people said it might be better, it might be more satisfactory to see if you can use those resources and competences in a different way. And maybe we could create a new way in which we can make use of existing skills. Sometimes you won't be able to, but I think there was a useful kind of correction Because after the IBM problem, everyone was very kind of skittish, really. They would say, the world's changed, we must change to keep up with it. And maybe they do. I mean, maybe they do. Everyone really has a website and so on there. But it's interesting kind of looking maybe at book publishers. When ebooks came around, then the thought was, gosh, conventional publishing and conventional bookshops are not going to have an existence. But even though we've had quite a few years now of ebooks and Kindles and the like, conventional books, conventional bookshops seem to be surviving quite well, and they've hung on to and made use of their continuing use of their resources and competences. Good example of this maybe is this use of core competences that's seen in some large companies. What are we really good at? And this is what we need to look after and try to lever that, try to make use of these fantastic competences in the best possible way. And a good example here is a company called Canon. You've heard of Canon. And the core competences that Canon has, well, it's got core competences in optics. Very good at making lenses, for example, and maybe fiber optics and all that kind of stuff. It's also very good, it's good in a lot of things, but the only one I'll deal with here is very small, precise motors. Small, precise, quick electric motors. Now, Canon, I believe, originally started off as a camera company. And in the camera company, obviously the optics had to be very good, but you also need these small, precise motors. You need it for automatic focus, you need it for the diaphragm of the lens changing and so on. You used to need it to transport the film forward and so on. It's all gone to electronic mechanisms now and so on. But they developed a fantastic expertise in optics and small motors. And their first kind of product, if you like, was cameras. I'm supposed to say cameras. It doesn't look like it, but it says cameras. And then they kind of looked at these resources here, these competences, and they said, where else could we maybe deploy optics and very precise motors and so on? And they thought about photocopying. Yeah, we have to take good images, maybe we have to zoom it in and out and so on there. You have to have very accurate motors to feed the paper, to work the zoom mechanisms and so on there. Yep, photocopiers. And then printers. If you're making an inkjet printer, it needs to be very precise how you move the inkjet heads across and advance the paper and so on. And of course you make these multi-functional devices now with scan and fax and print and so on as well. Frankly, I don't know whether they've done it or not, but I would imagine they could go into medical optics. So we have endoscopes, lenses that go down to look at your stomach. You've got the need for microscopes and so on there. All potentially making use of their core capabilities, their core competences, but making use of them in radically different markets. We kind of have the camera, which is a sort of domestic market, photocopiers and printers, which are predominantly office markets, some home markets in there as well. Medical, we're getting onto kind of scientific outlets as well. And that's the way to do it. Find out maybe what you're really good at and see all the different ways in which you could potentially use those resources.